Sonic Boom, Eggman's anti-gravity ray. We start out with Eggman walking around in actually realistic pajamas for once, wearing a bathrobe. I'm impressed with the show for caring enough to give him a brand new pajamas model. Talk about damned by faint praise. And when he tries to pick up the morning newspaper, it blows away, but luckily goes into his house. Eggman says it'll beat Mother Nature at her own game if he rotates his base. He's sick of the newspapers always being blown away from him when he tries to get them, so he wants to stop that entirely. I guess he only gets the newspapers out of fear. After Sonic screws up at soccer and complains about Knuckles digging tunnels and inconveniencing him and making me wonder why Knuckles bothered doing that, we see Orbot using anti-gravity ray to clean up some stuff. Orbot says this ray could be revolutionary to the world. I immediately wonder why Eggman hasn't made billions off of it. And Cubot, being a creative and fun-loving robot, just thinks he'd make a good hat and gets stuck up in the air. So Orbot and Eggman get trapped in the ray, and Orbot explains that the ray's scrambling Cubot's processors somehow. And then because some inventions get moved around by the ray, one of them hits the button to activate the tube system and bring them outside. Wait, how did Eggman get out of the gravity ray? Well, that's because he put on some boots and pressed the button on his wrist. That happened anticlimactically fast. Then after he wants to get his stuff back, Amy wants to prove girls can be good at soccer too, and Knuckles is smart for once by lampshading that bringing attention to gender roles in any way undermines gender equality by reminding people that she's breaking the status quo. He basically says it's kind of self-defeating of a feminist to make a big deal out of subverting gender roles nowadays. Because by bringing attention to gender roles at all, she's still implying that gender matters when she makes a big deal out of it. Even by trying to prove girls can be good at something too. It turns out this episode's by a female writer, so no wonder she gets it. So having a girl character point out that she's subverting them is obnoxious and dated today, compared to just having her play soccer and that's it. Which tells you that it really is no big deal. Obviously, Knuckles having those lines was really out of place in the Sonic series. I mean, since when would I ever talk about this in Sonic review? Knuckles gets stared at in shock because his friends recognize him as saying something smart sounding instead of dismissing him as stupid for once. And it gives us the good message that even meatheads can be feminists. I mean, his long-winded speech is out of place for the show, but I'll let it slide because Amy's had it coming for a long time. And this was written by a woman, not a guy who could be accused of trying too hard. So I can respect the sincerity of it, even if it came out of nowhere. Styx naturally assumes the gravity ray moving around is thanks to aliens. I mean, it's a tractor beam. But that'd be too interesting. AOSDH had aliens just fine, but this show would burst into tears if it showed aliens. So the gravity ray starts sucking up some villagers. Why did Eggman say he'd dock Orbot's pay if he didn't work hard enough when he doesn't pay them? That's bad writing just to force people to discuss it for a bad joke. Anyways, the Eggmobile gets sucked up too, and Eggman takes off just in time. Well, I guess the point is that it's more original and subversive for this to be an accident of Eggman's instead of on purpose to torment the civilians again. Even if it does make him look incompetent. He shouldn't have trusted Cuba alone with the ray. But I do like that it's an accident, because it's definitely refreshing. Eventually, Sonic gives some people a rope, and Amy starts pulling on it, and Cubot blasts some gravity rays from his hands briefly, and says that everyone should all float freely. This was foreshadowed by Orbot explaining that his brain's being messed with because of the gravity ray. After Dave gets sent away by the ray because Cubot's got a god complex now, Eggman wants to make his own fries, and Tails tells us the stakes. If people fly too high, they'll all suffocate to death. Cubot's brain is being messed with, I guess from electromagnetic interference, so it makes sense that he doesn't know the consequences of his decision. Gee, it sure is a good thing Tails had already made some spacesuits for him and Sonic just in case, and yet he's not prepared enough to make a ray gun. Orbot throws something up to Sonic, and he jumps out of the biplane and uses an energy beam to hang off the bottom, and jumps onto Cubot, and puts the gravity ray in reverse. I guess because he pressed the right button and it was labeled right. And it was sweet of Sonic to tell Tails he did a great job. Although, obviously his interaction with Tails isn't nearly as sweet as an AOSDH. Cubot complains about going back to his mundane existence, and it's sweet how relieved Orbot is that Cubot's back to normal. They really are friends. Then Tails reveals that Sonic didn't switch off the gravity ray, he put in reverse. Huh, I didn't see that coming. I thought the episode ended. In fact, even when I was reading out the script for this review, I thought the episode ended. So everyone's stuck to the ground lying on it, and the episode's padded out because Knuckles takes forever to dig instead of immediately doing it. He gets to and smashes the gravity ray, and we see Orbot and Cubot pushing against the wall of the base, and Orbot says that he's rotated the base an entire eighth of a degree. Why is Eggman putting up with this extremely slow and boring method instead of doing what I assumed he'd do from the start and having some giant crane lift up his base from the ground up, rotate it, and put it back down? That'd be cartoony. AOSCH, which would be more Sonic-like. I liked this episode. It had a main villain other than Eggman for once, and another change of pace. The gravity ray was inconveniencing the villagers without Eggman doing it on purpose to bother them, which makes more sense because what would he have to gain from bothering them? Maybe he's trying to threaten them into making him the ruler all the time, but they've never even offered him the job after all this time, and he's not telling them, make me your ruler. So why does he keep trying when he hasn't beaten Sonic yet? Anyways, Cubot's creative and fun-loving, so all he thinks about the anti-gravity ray is that it'd make a good hat. And he wants to fly, so he turns it on without his own master's permission, and starts floating and heads towards the village. And because it's messing with Cubot's brain, and for some reason he can blast gravity rays from his hands now, he makes everyone around him float. So Tails and Sonic don spacesuits they conveniently had to survive the upper atmosphere, and Sonic jumps onto them from the plane to reverse the gravity ray. Well, I can't commend the fact that, unlike in Sonic X, they actually thought that the heroes can't breathe in space. Sonic X would have just had them up there without spacesuits, and that would have been stupid. Here, they think of the characters as actual people, not mascots to advertise the games. And then Knuckles has to dig to get to it and smash it when everyone's pinned to the ground. There was some good stake to the conflict because Tails tells us the risk of everyone suffocating from flying too high up. And Cubot's not only having his processor messed with, but he's also a robot who's used to not having to breathe. So it's not like this makes him uncharacteristically evil, just stupid. It was interesting. I'm glad Eggman was smart enough to make anti-gravity boots just in case he'd get bothered by his own ray. Like how Tails was smart enough to have made spacesuits or whatever they're called, just in case he'd eventually need them. I like this writing. The plot wasn't forced, and we had some nice lampshading of how Amy's been written. So I'm guessing this writer will barely get to write anything. I think the reason I liked this episode was that it was focusing on the sci-fi part of Sonic, which is what makes it good. Now for the next episode. Victory. We started out with Sonic playing soccer, and I immediately skipped past the entire awful song playing. What is this, Sonic Underground? No, that would be a compliment! You know, in the Sonic X comic, Chris told Sonic that it would be cheating to have a supersonic hedgehog playing soccer. And yet, this show doesn't think of the realistic consequences of that at all. And Sonic just plays soccer exactly like everybody else because otherwise it would be cheating. Then don't have it be Sonic. It could be anybody playing soccer at this point. The mayor closes the rec center for apparently no reason, which you think would be an obviously bad idea for a mayor who wants to get re-elected. Already this plot feels forced. So the heroes plan on getting petitions done and hitting the streets. How delusional are they to think this would work? Of course, after they give the mayor the petition, he puts it in the shredder, and he says that he needed confetti. I'm glad they had this message for the audience. Some people still think that petitions do something. After he disgustingly breaks the fourth wall, Eggman shows up, and is told that control of the rec center can only change hands in athletic competition. This writing sucks. He says that the rules are arbitrary and convoluted, but one, he's the mayor! He can change them! And two, if the writer knows this, he shouldn't have written it. Oh yeah, and three, if Eggman wants to take control of something, why doesn't he just use robots to threaten people? Why doesn't he just grab the mayor with a giant robot? And Sonic looked like an idiot because he told Eggman he can't have a team without friends when it was obvious that Eggman would just make robots. Out of nowhere, Eggman gives up on using the Badniks and decides to go get the attention of the android versions of the heroes. Why wouldn't he just make robots from scratch that could play soccer? Sonic X had baseball playing robots, but here, He goes to recruit the robot heroes. Of all the different people he could have recruited, he recruits robots who actively hate him because they know who he is. And somehow, they actually go to a meeting with him, even though they immediately started shooting him with lasers when he landed his rocket. So realistically, they would have refused to even let him talk to them. After Eggman accidentally reads the conclusion card first, they somehow accept his gifts, which brainwash them to being on Eggman's side. Why the hell does the show keep insisting on calling androids cyborgs? That's so humiliating to the writers and characters. I mean, inside AM, everyone knows that Bunny is a cyborg. How could you be a Sonic fan and not know what the word cyborg means? I'm glad to see these characters again and see this obvious plot thread being used. But still, why did Eggman say that mind control costs anything? The robots easily beat the heroes in the first soccer game, and yet Orbot insists that they're evenly matched when they cream the heroes. This is why the show isn't self-aware just because it breaks the fourth wall. Eggman thinks that he already conveniently has a high school jock firmware update for the androids, when he didn't think he would need them. I mean, he's arrogant. Why would he think he would need them? So he updates them to talk in an obnoxious way and cheat at the soccer game. But they were already perfect at the game. How insecure was Eggman to think he needed to do this? And why do we need to see the androids interacting with Sonic after the soccer game? It was really tedious to see the Sonic and Knuckles androids arguing on the table and taunting Tails. This is a painful, horrible episode to sit through. This kind of shit makes me actually glad the show is just 11 minutes per episode. Because it sucks enough as it is, just being 11 minutes long. Of course, the heroes effortlessly lose once again. While it is nice to have a change of pace where they lose for once. It's weird that Sonic didn't go ballistic over losing this time, but I guess it's because he thinks that the Lightning Bolt Society is a bunch of losers, so it's really humiliating for him to lose to them, but he actually respects these guys. I immediately admired Robot Tails' black and red shirt. It reminded me of Miles. Then the androids smacked Tails with whips for being a nerd. Well, that was surprisingly mean-spirited of the show. That immediately reminded me of the Archie evil twins, but even they never did that. It was only Alicia who had the whip. So Tails decides to use their brains against the androids. Even though there was no actual proof they were stupid, he was just thinking in a stereotype, and he gets rewarded for it. They were good at soccer, which meant their smarts was in soccer. Shouldn't that be obvious? And even though Tails said they were going to use their brains, they don't use their brains. It doesn't look like it anyways. Why are the heroes padding out the episode with a dance routine with music? This is painful to watch. I'm so glad the show got cancelled, because it's just one terrible episode after another after another. I can barely think of any good ones. These robots would never just stand there and take forever to do anything while they're doing this. Obviously, if they're supposed to be jocks, they would just beat up these dorks the minute they started dancing. I don't understand why suddenly now the heroes are doing well, when they were being effortlessly creamed before. This feels like a Deus Ex Machina, like the music is magically enhancing their skill. I don't care about any of this. One of the tropes of bad writing is that the character's skill fluctuates at the drop of a hat. The Sonic X baseball episode was a masterpiece compared to this. In that show, it took advantage of the sci-fi fantasy genre with the baseball robots. It was fascinating to see how Eggman would make robots programmed for baseball. They extended their own limbs to get an unfair advantage. But what kind of unique robots could Eggman make to cheat at soccer? He couldn't, which is why this episode shouldn't have been made. Also, I bet even if they did cheat, like by moving at super speed, the mayor would just disqualify him because it's a competition. So I guess that's why he didn't do it? It doesn't matter that their enemies are robots. They could have just been regular people and the plot would have been exactly the same. Eggman's brainwashed non-robots before. The mayor says he'll keep the rec center open because everyone likes it, and close the library. And somehow only Amy is sad, when Tails should be sad too. He's a genius. Finally, Eggman sends the androids at the heroes. But all they're doing is wasting time. Tails just hits the wrench of the other Tails with his own. Common sense would dictate that the focus would all be on the action scenes, and we would have a long fight where the heroes were getting lots of hits in on each other. The writers have no idea why people watch the Sonic series. I'd rather see fights than boring soccer where the outcome is obvious from the start of every game. Instead of a fight scene happening, Tails magically figures out that they're being controlled by their new wristbands, when he could have just as easily assumed it was their new shirts. I mean, it's the heat of the moment. He's busy being distracted by a fight. It would have made more sense if he accidentally destroyed the wristband in the fight. And the story ends with Eggman being tossed around in his Eggmobile. This was a horrible episode! Every time there was a mundane soccer match with nothing sci-fi to spice it up, it was one team effortlessly beating the other. You could close your eyes and not even look at the screen and you'd miss nothing. So there's no reason to care about what was going on because it was just predictable and boring. How drunk do you have to be to think that a soccer episode is good enough for a Sonic show? How about we have the Transformers play soccer next? Sonic X's baseball episode is fantastic compared to this. It was interesting to see Eggman use robots specifically designed to cheat at baseball. Here, Eggman tries to use robots at first, but somehow he decides to only use the badniks that can't play soccer, like a fish robot. So he gives up on what wasn't an idea that was doomed from the start. I was immediately reminded of the early issue of Archie where badniks compete against the heroes in the Olympics, and effortlessly beat all of them, despite not even being human-shaped. But instead of doing something far more Sonic-like and getting the appeal of the series, Eggman randomly decides to brainwash the android version of the heroes, but not so they can just fight the heroes. Instead, they're mostly there to play soccer of all things. All of this started because the mayor decided to close down the rec center, because lack of funds apparently, and he had this. Why didn't he just raise taxes instead? Wouldn't that be a lot less controversial than closing down the rec center? And he had this forced rule that the ownership of the rec center is only transferred through athletic competition. And Eggman is someone who can get it. What also ruined the episode was that for no reason, Eggman brainwashed the androids out of the personalities of stereotypical obnoxious jocks. So it's official, he could have just used regular people who were jocks to begin with, and the plot would have been the same. And we really didn't need to see them at Medburger. Why would them changing personalities make them better at soccer, and why did he think he needed to do that when they were clearly creaming the heroes? Why did Orbot think they were equally matched? Fuck this episode. You see a title like Victory, and in any other Sonic show, it would be the title of the finale where they take down Eggman. Or at the very least there would be some kind of genuine action and tension going on, and not total mundanity. This is the last thing I would expect. And I hope it's not going to be a permanent new trend that almost every episode will have a terrible song playing in it, which does nothing but pad out the episode in a really obvious way, because the characters have no dialogue that makes you care about watching. You'd have to be really hypocritical to say Sonic Underground sucks for having bad songs in it, when Sonic Boom has done the exact same thing, but with the songs being a lot harder to skip without skipping actual content. And with no justification at all for the songs being played, because at least in Underground, it fit with the show's theme because the heroes were all in a band together. The amount of hype the show gets is absolutely ridiculous considering it has painful episodes like this. I felt like I was watching Sonic X again, because I was just bored out of my skull and wanted the episode to be over most of the time.